Hi, and thank you for joining me for another process video. And today is day 16 of 30 days of sketches with Christie's Beautiful Life. And today's sketch, you can see in the top left hand corner there, is created by the gorgeous Jessica Michaels. Jessica has her own YouTube channel. She's very successful, so I'll make sure that I add all her details down below. So do go and check her out because she's absolutely wonderful. Jessica really enjoys using mixed media on her background, so that's what I'm doing here. She's also a member of the Shimmers Paints design team, so I will be bringing in some shimmers just as an ode to her. So to start with, I've used Rustic Wilderness Distress Oxide. I've just watered that down on my glass mat and then used the packaging technique to smush that over the background to create the mixed media that Jessica's got in the sketch there. I then watered down a little bit of white acrylic paint and splattered that over because that's something that Jessica will quite often do on her layouts. And finally, I came in with shimmers in Precious Metal, which is like a brown colour, to bring in the brown into those greens on the background. So here are my two photos. They're 3x4 and they're photos from this weekend. Amelia took her friends up to Limdown, which is a gorgeous dam up near where she works, where you can walk around and it's absolutely beautiful up there. So it's wonderful now she can drive. She can do this for her friends because the other two don't yet drive. So they had a whale of a time up there. And they found this log carving of a face and her friend asked her to mimic the log carving, so that's what my layout is about. So I've pulled out my lovely Vicky Boutin Curiosities in Willow Grove for this layout again. I just thought it was the perfect collection with all the greens and browns and oranges. It just had to be done really. So you can see here I've matted my photos onto white cardstock and then I pulled out the 6x8 paper pad to find some other pieces to layer behind the photos. Now in truth I was going to create them as one mat, but every time I put the photos down I seem to put them the wrong way round. I wanted the one of Amelia pointing at the carving first of all and then the one of her trying to mimic, but each time I put it down I managed to put them the wrong way round, so I gave up on that idea and I'm just adding some layers behind each of the photos and then I'll combine them on one final layer at the end. So I'm trying to use up the scraps that I've cut previous pieces from because both sides of these papers work really well with these photos, and rather than use my distress tool I'm just using my fingernails to rough up the edges. I didn't want to break the fibres on the paper, I just wanted to have a nice curl really on the edges, so it does give a different look whether you use your fingernails or a sharp edge like the edge of the scissors or a distress tool. So just putting this piece up because I put it on the right hand side of the left hand photo, but then I keep moving it back and forth. I can't remember how it ends up actually because I have so many different layers on these photos at the end. It doesn't really matter. So just roughing up those edges again and then carrying on with the layering. And there are some absolutely beautiful tones in these papers, and you can either go really bright or you can go muted as I've done behind these. I chose a nice vivid green to start with, and then chose relatively muted colours to go behind before matting them both onto the polka dot paper, which you can see there. So just pulling that in now and trying to work out what I want to do. And this is where I mess around again with that strip, and I do end up with it on the left hand side there. So I'm just going to glue that down. I decide that I want the paler dots on the left hand side fading into the dark. You can barely tell, but it will make a difference on the finished layout, so it's important to try these things and decide which one works best for you. So just wanted another layer on this piece, and I was going to go with that brighter orange, but then spotted the reverse and decided to go with that as the main mat. But this little slither that I cut off, I decided that I am going to add to the right hand side there just as another layer. That definitely would have gone in the bin if it hadn't have gone on today's layout because it's too thin to keep. I keep keeping all these tiny bits of paper and eventually you have to make a decision, don't you? So again, just roughing up the edges where I can, using my fingernails, and then I'll glue that down onto the polka dot paper. And all this time I've just put the other paper off to one side to dry because I've got those splatters. It's going to take slightly longer. The house is still quite warm. We're well into October now, but it's not that cool yet in the UK, so things are still drying quite quickly. So just trimming off those excess pieces, and I will keep hold of those because they'll definitely come in handy in the future. One final rough up of the edges and then I can bring back the layout, the background, to see how that's coming along. There we go, so there it is, just trying to work out which way round to have it. Once again, I need to cover up a load of that mixed media with the photos, but I've got the right shape. That was the shape that I wanted, going tapering down to a point at the bottom. So just sticking those down. I definitely want my title to go above the photos, so just checking that it's straight using my T-square. And I pulled out these old Rosie Studio stickers. Now I won't make you watch me sticking all of these down because I do actually end up pulling this out and doing something else. As I was starting to decorate, I wasn't happy that the letters they aren't printed correctly on the word this, and it's just too white because I haven't really got any mixed media up there. It just felt way too white on this layout. So I'm starting to add some strips. Where Jessica's got the banners underneath her photos, I wanted some strips of paper. So I'm just using my T-square ruler as a straight edge to tear these strips into thinner bits because I still want the mixed media to show through underneath, and I like the effect of the torn edge as well. So I'm just curling that up and then adding some ATG to get that stuck down. And I don't add too many strips because, like I say, I do want the other bits to shine through, and there are other pieces that I want to add to this layout. But I like those 2 strips that I've added at the top, and then I spotted this branding strip from when I'd created a previous layout, and I really like that, so that's going to go on. And then I think there are just 2 more strips that I add after this. So I'm now pulling into the scraps that I've got from previous layouts from the 12 by 12 papers. So this is the first one, and I've just torn a little bit into the paper, and then I'm tearing that edge so I can get that stuck down. Once again, just roughing up the torn edge and then gluing that. And you can see I'm offsetting each time and leaving a gap between each of them. Some of those gaps will be filled in with other things, and some of them are going to be left so that the mixed media shines through. So here's the last piece. There was a little bit too much of that white edging on there, so I'm just tearing that off, and then that will go down at the bottom. And all these colours just go beautifully together, don't they? So even though they've got an aubergine and a blue in there, it all just melds really nicely into those photos. So now I'm pulling out the In Stitches stamp set from Hey Little Magpie, and I'm just going to add some faux stitching along almost all of those paper strips. I don't add it along the aubergine piece with the torn note paper. It just didn't seem to make sense to add it to that, but I do add it to the other pieces, and I make sure that I overlap on the edge on each end, so it looks like I have stitched those pieces down. And then I am going to bring in a couple of the other stamps from the set just to add some zigzags and things. Sorry, it's quite late at night and my voice is going. It's been a long day. And I'm using my archive link for this so that it doesn't bleed if I decide to add more mixed media to this layout. In the end, I don't actually. I'm quite happy with what I've got there, so I just leave it as it is. And then when I've got these zigzags down on top of the original stitching, I do actually come in with one of my 49 Market inks, and it's called Arctic Blitz, and just add some zigzag stitching to the bottom of the page using the zigzag that's got the tails at either end of it. So here it is now, just popping that down at the bottom. So there's that title back up again because I wasn't happy with it. So I'm going to go into the rub-ons, and I find one that says Exploring the Great Outdoors. And these rub-ons are phenomenal because I've got quite a few paper layers on above these photos or behind these photos. And I'm still able to layer this rub-on across all those different layers of paper so that it sits right next to the white edge of the photos there. So really happy with how that looks there. So I'm just going to use my rub-on tool to rub that on. And then I want to find some bits to fill in that gap next to the Exploring the Great that I've left to the right-hand side. So I'm going to cut out some of these stars. I pop one at the top here and overlap it onto the letters. And then I'll bring another 2 in, one for either side of the photos, just to create that nice visual triangle. So here's the second one, and I'm toying with putting it further up next to that title, but it does come quite far down in the end. Sometimes you just have to play about, don't you, and decide where you want to put things. So while I'm doing these stars, don't forget to check the description box down below to see the playlist of everybody else who's joining in on 30 Days of Sketches this series. I've had some problems, and I know some others have had some problems adding to the playlist, so do check out the hashtag that I've put in my title to see those who are joining in on Instagram and also those who haven't been able to add to the playlist. There's also a Facebook group, and people are adding their links to their videos on each day there, and that's what I should be doing as well. So now I've finished with those rub-ons, I'm going to come into the 6x12 sticker sheets, and straight away I find this one that says hello there, which I think is perfect to go with that photo, and a little tab to add my date, so that's going to go onto the right hand side there. And then some of the little wordy bits, one says collect memories, I've got the fresh air, see the beauty. There's a few different words that are going to go on here, and I will come back into those and add more towards the end. I'm also going to add some yellow stars to go with those green stars, just to bring that yellow up the page a bit, because I've got that in the strips beneath the photos. So just adding my journaling along the bottom, and it literally just says Exploring Limb Dam with Freddie and Caitlin, because that's who Amelia was with. And then I'm deciding that it all looks a little bit too white and a bit too stark. I've definitely covered too much of the mixed media, so I'm just going to create my own border using this Arden Creative Studio stencil, and then I'm going to just blend the ink out. So again, using that same Rustic Wilderness ink and just blending all the way around. I love this stencil. It's one of Katie Petit's, and it was a design that she used to use on a lot of her papers when she was designing for 49er Market. It's really great fun. So just adding that as texture really around the page to create this frame. So almost there, just the bottom to go. And I'm not being too precious, I'm not trying to line anything up. I just want to create this nice texture to go all the way around. And then I'll just more or less use what's left on the brush to create that halo all the way around the page. And you can see here I'm just sort of blending it out, and it's creating a really nice halo and a frame around the rest of the layout. And I'm much happier than the stark white that I had before. It was just a little bit too white. So just trying to use some of the leftover ink on the stencil rather than going back into the ink pad, because I only want it to be very subtle around the edge, and that's definitely enough. So now I'm pulling in this, it's like a cheesecloth that my lovely friend Gwen gave to me at a crop recently, and it's been hanging out on my desk. I've used a little bit on a layout, but I wanted to use a bit more. So I'm just pulling a couple of the greens. I've got a darker green that's going towards the top, and then a paler green that will go halfway down the strips. And this just creates a different texture on that layered effect underneath the photos. I was considering pulling in pom-pom trim. I know that Jessica loves to use pom-pom trim on her layouts, but it just felt a little bit too bulky for me for this layout, so just sticking to this cheesecloth. So there's that down. I'm writing the date, which is the 11th of October. And then I just spot this little die cut piece or laser cut piece, and it says find beauty everywhere. So I'm just going to add it to that strip there, and it looks like it's all part of the stitching that I've got with the faux stitching from the stamp set that I used before. So now I'm looking for some little bits to embellish. So straight away I see these mushrooms. I love these, and the blue matches Amelia's jeans quite nicely, so it's nice to pull that blue in. And then I love this maple leaf, but it's too big, so I'm going to add that to the other side. And I'm just going to add some foam pads to the back of these mushrooms or toadstools. I'll stick the stalk down flat, but it's just nice to have the caps raised up a little bit to create a bit of a shadow and dimension on the page. I do want to bring something in behind these, so I'm not actually going to glue them down yet. I'll do that off screen later. And I'm going to add some foam pads to that maple leaf as well. I think it's a maple leaf, tell me if I'm wrong. So just using these tiny tabs. I need to bring in another packet of 5mm foam pads because I seem to have used those up. So now going through the one of the ephemera packs, and I'm just looking for some bits to add, as I say, as layering pieces behind, just as a mat really for those toadstools to sit on. And then I spotted this label, so I'm going to cut this in half and tuck that down the right hand side. And then I've got the other half for another day. And that's just creating another layer behind those photo mats that I've already got going on there. So it's all starting to come together now. Just going through another few bits and pieces around the bottom of the page. I found this little word strip that says "Be Happy," and I think that's going to work nicely on top of that leaf. And then this little paper clip that has number 3 on it is just going to sit here on the side of that green paint chip piece that I put down there, because obviously it was 3 of them exploring. So that's where the number 3s come in. So back onto these stickers, and I'm just finding a few more wordy bits, as I said, just to add around the bottom of the page. And I should probably go back in and add some adhesive, because it's going on mixed media and they never glue that well down. So I'm probably better adding some of my own wet glue to these just to hold them in place a long time. And finally, I wanted to add some enamel dots from my stash, just to use some, because I've got so many in my drawer. They really need to get used a little bit more on layouts, and they just add a pop of colour and just look really pretty on the layout. And that's it done. So thank you so much for joining me. I do hope I provided you with some inspiration with this. And other than that, I shall see you very soon. Bye.